Giroux to center. Lundvik shoots. He scores! Johnny Lundvik does it again!
Jarvis in close shot. There's a goal. Seth Jarvis, the 17-year-old, short side, glove side, high, just under the crossbar.
Cutting to the front of the net, and they score. Reese Newkirk along the right wing just took the pass. That was phenomenal patience from Seth Jarvis and the Winterhawks.
Hey, this is Reese Newkirk, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast.
Welcome into Pucklandia. Pleased to have Josh Critzer of PNW Hockey Talk on the show to look at trade deadline and what it means for the Winterhawks. It was and maybe the rest of the division or league, depending on how far we want to go with this. But first off, it's good to have you back on the show, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I appreciate it. It's always good to be on, and it's been a busy week here. But it's. A lot's gone on since we last talked, only about a week ago. So,
obviously there wasn't a lot of moves for Portland, but they were pretty significant. And, some high-end, a couple high-end guys coming over to Portland and some valued, draft capital going out the door and a couple of roster players, which is a little unusual for this the way that Portland typically does things. I mean, kind of where do you want to go with that, Josh?
Yeah, I think there's obviously the big fish was being Nate Danielson and acquiring him from the Brandon Wheat Kings, and what he's going to mean to the Winterhawks and how he's going to kind of slot in. I think there's going to be plenty of options for Mike Johnson and Kyle Gustafson, especially on the power play. I think that's something we'll maybe want to touch on a little bit. There is just kind of what that power play is going to look like. But when you look around the league, especially after kind of right after World Juniors a week ago, that's when Connor Geekie and Matthew Savoy were traded from the Wenatchee Wild to Swift Current and Moose Jaw respectively. Those were kind of the two big fish that were out there, and then kind of the other one that you weren't sure if what was going to happen with Nate Danielson and Brandon. That kind of turned a little bit into an arms race out east with Saskatoon really kind of pushing all their chips into the middle as well. So there was just kind of this question was what was Portland going to do? Were they going to look at depth? Were they going to look at trying to add kind of a blue chip like they got in Danielson, or kind of where were they headed? And the deal kind of came together in kind of the last few minutes there before the deadline, and ultimately Portland was able to get Danielson, who is the 9th overall pick in the 2023 draft, which caused a lot of confusion on social media that he's not an 18-year-old. He's in fact a 19-year-old. He's not an overager. There's just a lot of confusion I was seeing back and forth on social media. But with him having a late birth year, despite it only being his first year after being drafted, he is a 19-year-old. So Portland will only have him for kind of the stretch run here and playoffs. He will, with already being signed by Detroit, he will not be back with the Winterhawks next year as an overage player. So, but he's definitely going to bring in a lot of firepower. He adds a lot of size up front as well. He's got a good frame, 6'2", 188. So he's going to infuse a lot of offense into the Winterhawks lineup. That's for sure.
Yeah, a player that we've talked about. I guess I didn't think about it till just now, but we talked about him quite a bit on our last episode, and at least that time was justified for the listeners because that actually came to fruition. But it almost didn't. I mean, a friend of WHL Unfiltered, Perry Bergson, said that Murray told him that the Wheat Kings GM told him that there was 8 teams in on this player, yep. Which is a pretty interesting, a good position to be in if you're the Wheat Kings. And I don't want to diminish the roster players that went the other way for Portland. That were fans surely liked both of those players, but I felt like for the prices being as high as they were, I didn't think that they got out of that too bad with what was it, two firsts and a fifth?
Yeah, 2 firsts, a fifth, defenseman Ravendal, and forward Nicholas Johnson.
So yeah, to me, I mean, you look at what some of these other guys went for, Grayson Sachin, or both the high end forwards out of Wenatchee. I mean, I thought that it was a lot closer to the Fraser Minton trade, which
yes.
I thought was, I mean, it's easy for me to say, they're not my picks to give up, and you only get 1 first a year, but I thought it was a pretty reasonable trade in comparison to some of the other ones.
Oh, 100%. And, I think, from Brandon's perspective as well, there was a lot of talk that they wanted, because they kind of feel like their window is going to open, next year, especially as some of these top teams start to, Medicine Hat's definitely going to be up there, next year as well. They're an absolute wagon with some of their younger players. But, Brandon, a lot of the ask that they wanted was 18-year-olds. And so that's why I think you see, Johnson and Ravendal being included as they're both 18-year-olds. And so, they'll get an opportunity to get some playoff experience, this year with the Wheat Kings. And, Johnson had some experience last year in the playoffs and got into some games as well. I think he got into 9 of them, I think, last year. So, or all 9, I should say. But, I think that kind of was part of the reason why Portland was able to, avoid paying some of the picks, was because there were roster players that were included, and that just makes a big difference. And it helps Brandon keep their window that they've identified. It'll help them next year, and it also helps Portland, as they've got a logjam of defensemen and forwards that are signed for next year that will be competing for spots. So it opens things up a little bit for the Winterhawks. It is going to kind of create a little bit of a vacuum for right now, but Johnson has been injured. He hasn't played in a little while. I think his last game was back on December 10th, so he's been out injured. But I know he was close to getting back to going. So they'll be able to help Brandon this year, but then they're also going to kind of contribute a little bit again more as 19-year-olds next season. And from Portland's perspective, they gave up 2 first-round picks. They didn't give up their first-rounder for this coming draft in 2024, and I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well. Their pick in 2025, they gave up as the first-rounder, and then 2027. And that first-rounder in 2025, I think Brandon probably wants that, because Portland is going to be a much younger team next season, as they'll lose all 3 overagers, and they've got several 19-year-olds as well. So, Portland's, they don't have a second and a third round pick now in the 2024 draft, and that's something that, that they can maybe try and recoup some of those picks as they try and sort out their overage situation for next year. And the other thing too, that's not 100%, I don't know how much of it's out there, and whether or not, something happens here in kind of the final couple of, weeks and months before the draft. But there is kind of this looming Graham Jones unsigned first round prospect out there that the Winterhawks drafted, and the WHL gives you a compensatory second round pick if you don't sign your first round player. And in fact, the last time that happened was Tyson Jugnoth with the Swift Current Broncos. So that pick, the Broncos were able to get in the draft after he committed to college, which is what Jones would have in this upcoming draft. Portland would then pick up basically the 45th overall pick in the 2024 draft, should he not sign with the Winterhawks or they don't trade his rights. So in one sense, you're kind of getting a second round pick back if Jones doesn't sign. But yeah, I think that's a really long-winded way to say that you're absolutely right, that the picks that Portland gave up, they're enough in the future that you can try and recover some of those picks. Portland has also done a really good job of drafting players in the later rounds. The majority of this team, outside of the trades that they've made, have been players that are kind of in the later rounds and things like that. So, I think Clausen is the only first-round pick on the team. I I believe, unless you're counting the import draft. So they've been able to assemble talent using kind of the later round picks as well. So, there's obviously cause for concern in terms of the cupboard, but they have a long track record of being able to handle that, and they've got such a deep scouting pool, and all the scouts do such a great job of finding these players and being able to include them and get contributions up and down the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, Kiefer Bellows was a 6th-round pick, if memory serves, and
Yep.
I think the first guy they picked that year, and then it was a bad year for draft picks, and then guys like I mentioned on Unfiltered that Chase Delio was a 9th-round pick, and you won
Yep.
a championship and played for 3 more with him. So they have done well with that in the past, but it is it can be a little tougher. To rely on those things, but it's opened up some some flexibility to deal with resources in a different way than a lot of teams do.
Yeah, and even this year's team, Marcus Newen, who leads the league in shorthanded goals, he's an 11th round pick. Josh Zakreski is an 8th round pick, right? Like, those are guys who have done a really good job for them. And even Nick Johnson, who was included in the trade, he was a 10th round pick, right? So, kind of the list goes on and on about where they're able to find some of these players. The goalie they just signed, Merrick Schlenker, he's an 8th round pick. So they just kind of continue to be able to find these players, and it really can make a difference in your lineup when you can get players like that later in the draft and come in and kind of play in your top 6 and top 9. And, 2 of their overage players are list players, right? So as they continue to find, players like that, Luca Cagnoni is a list player. Another one of the, is the top defenseman on the team. So you have these types of abilities when you're Portland that maybe some of these other WHL teams who have to rely solely on the draft and the top end of the draft. So, obviously, if you can hit on it, great. But Portland's top 2 picks that are eligible to be playing on this year's team, Graham Jones and Jaden Perron, are who were, Jones was the 1st round pick, and then Perron was the first pick in the 2nd round, 23rd overall. He's playing for University of North Dakota right now. So even when they've had, top picks in the late 2 rounds, or the top 2 rounds lately, they've unfortunately not been able to get those guys across the line. Now, granted, they've been able to sign their first 3 picks from the 2023 draft, which is great. With Darby, Duguay, and Chapman. So that's gonna help. They've got kind of that influx of what will be 16-year-olds next year eligible to play. So the cupboard's not bare by any means. Yeah,
and we've seen we mentioned
Kamloops
and Seattle, and I'm trying to think who else comes to mind, but some of these
Wenatchee.
Wenatchee, some of these teams that have figured out ways to kind of shorten the cycle of the rebuild, and go through some immediate pain and then pick back up. I mean, I think Kamloops in the last 2 weeks, I think they have more picks than anybody else all of a sudden, and they didn't have any to start the year. So it's if you can, I assume that some of the veteran general managers, like MJ, is probably taking notes on that and paying attention. I mean, we haven't really had to have a rebuilding year since Mike was in Pittsburgh, and even then they went 500, made the playoffs in the second comp on year. As frustrating as that was around here, it was still kind of I mean, it wasn't like it was in the before times, or you see like what Seattle or Kamloops going through right now.
Yep. And that's one of the things that the organization prides itself on is consecutive 40-win seasons, and not doing these crazy swings where you're a favorite to win the league and then you're out of it for the next 2-3 years while you rebuild and you have to say goodbye to some of your top players. So that's just not how the Winterhawks style is, and how Johnson likes to run his organization as the president, general manager, and head coach. So that from that perspective, it's a different philosophy. And if you look at if you look at this trade of Danielson versus, the Hofer trade, I think the big difference is obviously you're seeing, only 3 picks as opposed to, I think it was 6 or 7 in that one. And, there was multiple, still 2 first-round picks separated by 2 years as well. But then you've got second, thirds, and fourths and fifths in there as well. So, Mike has done these trades before, but it's been about 4 years since he's traded some of these really high picks. So he is going for it in a way, if you will, with getting Danielson, and then you look and you see Prince George, Mark Lamb and their general manager there has done a really good job of identifying talent that is good, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit on last week's show, of just the ability to kind of find guys who fit the junior system and the system he wants to play that may not have the NHL pedigree, but he gets the most out of his players. And, so they made a couple of kind of, if you will, more minor moves that aren't going to maybe show up on, some of these, NHL, talk shows and things like that of oh my gosh, of first rounders are getting traded and things. But, but Prince George didn't exactly, I would say load up by any means. Everett didn't do anything either. They had made a move, in the week or in the days prior, getting an upgrade on defensemen from their standpoint. So, there's a couple little moves there, but by all means, I think this makes Portland probably the favorite in the Western Conference.
Well, and you look at, we talk about how this team is, has built, itself over historically, with through some later round picks and astute listing and trying to identify talent that a lot of other teams might not have valued as highly. And you look at the cycle that they've been on. They've really been building towards this year for some time. I mean, coming into the year with 4 19-year-old defensemen, now you have 5. Yep. I mean, you look at last year when they didn't really add anything and didn't spend the assets, aside from a Chaz Lucius, that obviously that was that star burned too bright, but and so it was really frustrating to not be able to have a really good hockey team, but not be able to compete with Kamloops. But that's because it wasn't, they were a year early. I mean, it's really set up for this year. I mean, on WHL Unfiltered, I made the comparison to this year's Medicine Hat Tigers maybe being in a kind of a similar boat that
yep.
They're really good, but probably not going to be able to compete with Saskatoon, and so you try to save those assets for the year after. But that being said, I mean, I feel like there's probably a lot of pressure on the Winterhawks. As far as you've built for this year, you sacrificed a little bit, of potential last year. Put your eggs in this basket. So I don't know how much the players are feeling that, but I got to think the front office is.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, too, when you look at some of the picks and things, we were talking a little bit about, what Portland gave away. And, I was looking and I was talking with a couple of people within the organization and just kind of chatting about the different, approaches and styles. And, Moose Jaw, by, from kind of the list that I'm looking at, since kind of the midway part of the season, or kind of how they've overchanged their roster, overhauled their roster. They've brought in 5 other players and acquired 3 picks. And kind of the top player there being Matthew Savoy. But what they traded out: 5 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, a third, fourth, sixth, eighth, and then 5 roster players. That's a very different loading up than what you saw Portland just do. And so, Swift Current's kind of done a little bit, and, I'm sure, Sean on WHL Unfiltered's got a lot of experience and stuff with that from his time there with the Broncos and how close he is with that. And, and it's kind of interesting, just the cycle of junior hockey, and it's 2 kind of the similar teams that we saw, 4 or 5 years ago, kind of pushing all their chips in the middle are kind of back up here on top. And, it is just kind of what junior hockey is kind of all about.
And, if that sets up, an inevitable showdown, or not necessarily inevitable, but a likely showdown with either Prince George, Everett, or both, or maybe Victoria or Wenatchee. I mean, depending on how things settle out. I mean, again, the Cougars didn't really do much, and Everett added a nice, overage defenseman, but otherwise kind of sat back. I kind of wonder what their strategies are as far as trying to rule the West here.
Yeah, and I think it's going to, Everett's got a lot of picks, and they're probably looking at it going, okay, let's, you talked about before about being maybe a year early, and they've got they've got 2 first-round picks in 2025, and they've got 2 first-round picks in 2024, and so, they could be looking at it going, okay, let's let Portland and PG battle it out this year, and we'll rise to the top next year, and we've got these picks that we can either kind of bolster our team, going forward, or we can use these assets again at the draft when you kind of start building out your roster for the next season. And so they could be looking at it as, okay, let's get some of our younger guys an experience. We like the team that we have. Let's go to battle with the guys that we've got, and I've got an overage goalie and Tyler Palmer that can win games for them as well. So, or steal games if they need him to. So, there's all sorts of different options there. But the team that really surprised me the most was probably Vancouver, and they're sitting 8th in the conference right now. But they make a couple of big deals after selling off the past couple of years with the Justin Sordiff, and then I'm blanking on his name from last year. Who went to Wenatchee or Winnipeg?
They moved their captain 2 years in a row.
Yeah, exactly. And so you kind of look at it and you go, okay, are they looking to get some playoff experience? Do they feel like they can climb up a little bit in the standings? But they've played 2 extra games, but I think they're still 6 points back of Kelowna for 6th. So it's a long ways to go, and then they're 16 points back of Victoria in 5th. So at most likely, the highest Vancouver's going to climb is just 6th, which puts you in a battle with most likely, Wenatchee or Everett and all those things. But yeah, again, these teams, especially in junior hockey, where these teams make their money is in the playoffs. And so sometimes you look at the moves that they make, and it's okay. Can we get ourselves to getting to maybe 3 home playoff games, and kind of get us into the positive in terms of revenue and profit for the year, and also when you've got younger guys like Vancouver does, you want to get them playoff experience, and you want to get them that opportunity. It's why Prince George is going to be a real tough out in the playoffs this year, because 2 years ago, the Riley Heights on that team were 16-year-olds going up against Portland, and yeah, they probably were real long shots to win that series, but the experience that they gained by being there is going to pay off dividends, in a couple of years down the road. So that could be what Vancouver's doing, but some of the prices and stuff that they paid, if you look at what they paid for Connor Levis, and then you kind of translate that or correlate that back to what Portland paid for Danielson, it's, Levis is a good player, and he's got, Memorial Cup experience and things like that, but from Portland's standpoint, like, I go, the little bit extra that they gave up there, I think is a much better, cost versus, what you got in exchange.
Yeah, I mean, Danielson is signed by an NHL team. I mean, yep. not a real NHL team, but
as the Colorado fans are talking, well, yeah,
but an NHL team nonetheless. But I mean, there's just no rules anymore. It's a total breakdown of society. I mean, you look at,
yep.
Spokane traded a second, a third, and a roster player for Shea Van Olm from Kamloops, and they're, I mean, they have a lot of picks. I mean, Bardsley's done a really good job of amassing resources there, but I mean, it seemed like an odd move to me, and and I keep talking about it, but the Oil Kings adding a really good player in Grayson Sachin, and when they're in dead last in the East, and I don't maybe it'll make sense later on. I know that Saskatoon would do stuff like this a couple of years ago, and it seemed odd, and then over time it makes more sense and comes out on the logical end when the dust settles. But at the moment, I'm just like I don't know. It seems weird, but it's so that if the top team in the division at the time get rid of their guys and the bottom team added a bunch, so it seems a little topsy turvy, but it's kind of as the market evolves, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, and it's especially with the rule change. I bet you I didn't get a chance to listen to it's on my queue of podcasts right now to listen to your show that you had with Perry, and just kind of the from up in Brandon, and just how the whole dynamic in the league has shifted with trading, not being able to trade 16 and 17-year-olds now without permission, and which is why I think you're seeing more and more of these picks being included, and especially with when you're able to trade a roster player or a prospect who's a 16-year-old, you've at least seen him in the Western League. You have some experience and some tape on him to know what you're getting as a player, and you've got somebody who's committed to the league and all of that. So I think that's definitely changed some things around and what we've seen in the prices over the past 2 years. And I think whenever the league's hosting the Memorial Cup, you'll just naturally see the prices be a little bit higher. But from this standpoint, it's just kind of the way junior hockey's kind of turned into it. And it's not exclusive to the Western League. The OHL and the Q have got quite the traits as well.
Yeah. In some ways, I feel it's still the Wild Wild West maybe isn't quite as wild. I mean, it's not a. I mean, I don't apples and oranges, but you compare it to the transfer portal and NCAA football or something. I mean, there's just
Yep.
It's all over the place, but. Where we want to go now? Did we already sufficiently talk about the defenseman that they acquired here a couple weeks back?
Yeah, with Jugnauth, I think we touched on a lot of that. I think, but when I guess the one other point I wanted to make on that when because I had received a lot of questions from Portland fans, just like, why didn't they make another move? Like what if you're going to push all your chips in for Danielson, like, why aren't you making another move? Well, when you look at, and we touched on last week of, Jugnauth. Now, granted, if he's not back as an overage next season, they'll get their second round pick back in 2025. But that's why they don't have a second round in 2026. That's why they don't have a third round in 2024. And then you also have, Diego Bonazzoni, who was traded as well, and so that there's a bunch of picks that were included in that as well. So I think there were second round picks in there. So that could be a situation too where Johnson's going to need some of his picks around. So I just think that's the other kind of element that's there with why Portland didn't maybe make some other moves. I know they were sniffing around on some other guys and some other players. I'm not going to comment on that since the moves didn't happen. Just out of respect for those players that didn't get traded and things like that. But again, you just look at some of the costs and some of those other depth guys and what they were costing, in second round picks and third round picks, and you kind of look at, okay, how much do we trust that versus or trusting a player that is, how is he going to fit into our system versus a guy that we have, and also Johnson's going to want to get minutes for Miller and McDonough if he can. Those are two big pieces of the future as 16-year-olds, and how does he elect to use Darby and Yaremko? I think those are two other kind of wild card players as well who could maybe benefit from some of there's an extra roster spot open, I guess, if you will, with Johnson being traded out of the forward group. Now, granted, he hasn't been playing, but he was going to slot back in either under the kind of that third line or fourth line. So that kind of gives those other guys now that opportunity as well. So, which kind of gets into, I think, the other thing to talk through is just what does Portland do with their line combinations? And, that top line right now of Clausen, Davies, and Stefan is borderline unstoppable for teams. What's the phrase? You can't stop them. You can only hope to contain them or something like that. And so do you break them up? What do you do there when you infuse Danielson into the lineup? I don't have anything confirmed yet, but there's a chance that he may not be here this weekend and that he may be joining the Winterhawks later into next week. So if you don't see him in a Winterhawks jersey, quite yet this weekend, just no need to panic. There's all sorts of things that can take place there between, all the snow and all the travel stuff that's going on right now. And sometimes when you have, Canadian players playing for Canadian teams, there could be visa challenges. We've seen that with sometimes at the start of the Neely Cup where players aren't, able to get here right away. So there's a lot of things that may have to get worked through. But, also what do you do with that power play? And, Danielson, I think, is going to be a weapon on the power play. But what's absolutely crazy, and you're looking at his stats here, he doesn't have a power play goal this year. And I don't know, I think he's only got a couple assists on the power play right now with Brandon. So, Portland's power play is lethal, it's deadly. But ultimately, what do you do? And Kurt, who helps me out with PNW Hockey Talk, he and I were talking about okay, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to you don't take Clausen off the half wall? That's where Danielson was playing in Prince in Brandon. Davies is kind of your net front guy. You can maybe have Jack O'Brien, but he's kind of been your distributor a little bit. And Kurt was also talking about you got Cagnoni on the running the point, and then you got Stefan on the other wing, kind of taking shot. So what? There's only 5 spots available there now. Does that help bolster your second unit? Where do you put him there? Where does Danielson stay as a center? Does O'Brien stay as a center? Johnson's been using O'Brien for the past 2 years as kind of that defensive center who matches up against other teams' top lines. Do you really want to tinker with that too much? Do you put Danielson on the wing? There's a lot of different things. How do you use Chizowski? Does Chizowski move to the wing? You've got all sorts of questions, but I think there's gonna be kind of anytime you have a trade like this, it's exciting. There's options. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer with it, but there's a lot of questions, and it'll be fun to see how the coaching staff uses kind of this new shiny new toy in Danielson.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of clubs in any level that would love to have the problem of we got too many good guys to find time on the power play for. So
yep.
I think you can live with it. You just go with the hot hand that night, or how that week is going or whatever. I mean, I think that could be a lot of it too. So, but
yeah, and we've seen it, right? Kurt really pointed this out too. So credit to him. But in that Prince George game, Portland, a lot of their power play up until then was kind of running it, kind of from up high. Well, in the Prince George game, their power play adjusted, and they started running everything from down low below the goal line. Well, so maybe it's a situation where, depending upon the opponent you're playing, that's where you kind of mix guys in and out. It's okay, let's move O'Brien from, okay, when we got a little bit of a bigger team, we moved Danielson in, and now you've kind of got two bigger, stronger guys up, near net front with Davies and Danielson, and then. Okay, now if you've got a team that's a little bit more aggressive on the penalty kill, like Victoria, is known to really kind of just pressure the puck and kind of force you to make fast, crisp passes. Okay, that's when you move Jack back up to that top unit, or all different sorts of things. So there's lots of different options that are out there, and like you said, it's definitely a good problem to have, and I think it's really going to help Danielson. I don't think, I was seeing some things yesterday about him not having a great year and all those different things. And I don't want to bash on Brandon or how they used him or different things like that. But, we talked about this on last week's show, that the Winterhawks and Johnson are really good at getting the most out of players. And we've seen it with what's happened with Josh Davies and what he's been able to do. And I'm excited to see how Danielson elevates his game when he gets here to Portland and move into kind of a top team, a top scoring team. There's going to be a lot of talent around him, regardless of what line he plays on. I think with his playmaking ability and his size, it could be a lot of fun seeing how he interacts with Newen. And if that's the case, if your line is, Danielson, O'Brien, and Newen, your third line of Chizowski, Buttazzoni, and Zakreski, look out. That is a dynamic third line, and that's going to cause some matchup nightmares down the line. And, that gives Portland a really, really solid top 9. And that's just, I think, just is going to speak to the depth of this team. But they now also have that game breaker in Danielson who can just flip the switch. You're not the 9th overall pick in the NHL draft for no reason. and he's going to have that ability to kind of be that game breaker, and a guy that will kind of demand the puck and want the puck in the closing minutes, which is the closest we've seen since Lucius, and Lucius was here for 6 games, but probably the most kind of dynamic player they've had, game breaker wise, since Jarvis.
You talk about closing. I mean, you mentioned the Prince George game. I mean, maybe we could either real quick recap on that weekend playing Prince George and Everett. So the other heavies in the Western Conference currently, and I thought it was really interesting, really both nights, especially Everett, that every time the Winterhawks scored, Everett found a way to answer seemingly in the next shift, but they battled back and dealt with that adversity and picked up 4 points over the weekend against a couple of formidable foes. What do you take out of that weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. And they gave up some goals after they scored, but a couple weeks ago we were talking about the exact opposite, where the other team would score and Portland would come right back. But the two things that I go back to on that game, or those two games, is you have Newen, who scores a shorthanded goal to get the game into overtime when they were about to get no points. They had that late push and had the penalty, and just kind of out of nowhere, Chazowski to Newen, and next thing you know, it's overtime. So they kind of escaped, there with, and then win it in the shootout. And you get the two big points there. And then the next night, you're going up against Prince George, who the last time they were in Portland, they shut them out 4-0, and the score wasn't even, it should have been a lot more than that probably. But Portland's power play was deadly, 3 for 7 on that night. And I think that's more the story, is that they've got that. And then they were then able to get another really late goal with a minute left with Josh Davies off just a really strong play on the rush. And so I think the compete with this team, we saw it in Tri-City with 2 empty net, or 6-on-5 situations. So this team just doesn't quit. And, I've seen some people saying cardiac kids and different things like that. I don't think they're quite at Victoria's level in terms of number of comeback wins, in the third period and things like that. But they've handled some adversity recently, and they've handled it really well. And in some of the areas where they've struggled, they've made adjustments and improvements. For a while, it was, okay, they couldn't shut down the other team's top line. Well, they've kind of addressed that. They were struggling in 6-on-5 scenarios. They've kind of addressed that. It's just kind of the flow of hockey and kind of how things go, and they're never going to quite be perfect. But, in talking with Johnson after both nights, it was, he likes these opportunities. He likes that the games are close. He likes that there's adversity, because the playoffs aren't going to be easy. The playoffs aren't going to be winning 5-1 every night, as much as, as fans are going to want to see, those types of score lines. It's going to be these 3-2, 4-3 type of games. And having this experience that they had last weekend with those 2 games against Prince George and Everett kind of as measuring sticks to see where they are, they just did a really good job, and they're still doing this with their whatever level of goaltending you want to ask about or kind of clarify. They're not doing it with their top 3 goalies right now, and so to be able to, you got to give a lot of credit to Nick Avakian and how he played in both those games. There are other goals he maybe wants back, yeah, but there's also some saves he made that you thought he had no business making. So, a lot of fans are, it's like, well, he should have stopped that one. Okay, but how about the 4 that he stopped that he shouldn't have, right? Like, sometimes that's my counterpoint on goalies, but there was a lot to like in those games. They were 4 for 4 on the PK against Prince George, and Prince George had a lethal power play coming in. And Zach Funk's going to get his goals. I think he scored on, however many, how many goals does he have, Chad? I mean, a bunch, right? Like, he's leading the league by 42. Here 42, it is. Yeah. 42 goals, right? Like, that's not Connor Bedard scoring 42 goals, right? Like, he's going to get his chances. He's going to score. But after that, they held him in check. And I think that's a big measuring stick. And I think those are things that, they're going to have 2 rivalry games this weekend against Seattle, and then you get Kamloops coming in on Monday. Teams that are a little bit lower in the standings, but there's a lot to like from last weekend, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, 42 goals is a pretty good year in this league, and there's still like several months left. So
yeah,
I'm really curious as to what kind of total he might end up with there. I mean, back to the, we had Bjorkstrand and Sven Berchi and some of these guys, Ty Ratty here locally. I mean, this guy might be, eclipsing some of those numbers for the season. I'm really keeping an eye on that, but. Yeah, I definitely wanted to circle back around the goaltending, and you did. I mean, there's 5 goalies currently on the roster, 3 of them on IR. You're keeping, or 2 of them on IR rather. And you're keeping 3 of them just because you about got to have 3 in order to have 2 of them play the way the things are going for this team. I mean, when it's cliche, but if you can add a Jan Spoonar quality of goalie late in the year, I mean. How many first rounders is that? To acquire a guy like that. Whereas, presumably, I mean, I don't know if you have any publicly shareable information, but is that rehab on track? Do you think?
It is on track. I think he's probably. I don't have anything official, but just based upon kind of what we've seen and what Johnson has told me in the past of. Kind of the timeline is, they kind of go through their initial piece and then they kind of go from crutches to, walking again. And I'm not kind of giving away any information here, but, Spoonar is walking. He's not on his crutches or anything like that. He was out walking for the New Year's Eve skate and things like that. So he's making his progress. I haven't been able to get out to practice to see if he's skating yet, but that's kind of the next step. We saw Brunin take that and be able to at least dress to be the backup last weekend. Whether or not he was healthy enough yet to go into the game, I think that's still maybe some questions there. I don't have any inside information on that one either, but they are still expecting him back this season, and you're probably looking at about a month, I would guess. I'd love to be wrong and see him back sooner, but it's the type of injury that you don't want to rush back, and you want to make sure that he's 100% healthy, doesn't re-injure it or anything like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. He almost kind of becomes a later re-addition to your team, and the fact that they've been able to win as many games as they have with goalies that weren't on this team to start the year is remarkable, and also you have to give a lot of credit and thanks if you're Winterhawks fans to Nick Avaki and Justin Marich, because those are guys who they could have mailed it in. They could have been like, this isn't my team or whatever, and they've done everything that's been asked of them and more, and that's been a big reason why Portland has stayed where they are in the standings, and it has kind of been on a little bit of a run. I think they're 9-1 in their last 10 games, if I remember right. So it's just a big part of the hockey, and you kind of also got to credit the system that they're playing. And yeah, are they giving up goals? Yeah, it's junior hockey. They're going to give up goals, but they're also getting timely saves. They're winning the game in the shootout. Right, Portland has sometimes struggled in the shootout recently, it feels, and Avakian was able to help him get the 2 points against Everett, and that's just a really special time right now. And he gets his first, and Avakian gets his first career shutout with Portland after playing years in Tri-City, and just seeing how that locker room responded for him was really cool to see, and just how tight knit that group must be. And we saw it when Hofer went to World Juniors. And it was Dante Januzzi and Isaiah DeLaura that were there, to kind of fill in the gap for the month that Hofer was gone. And they ended up winning the division and the conference by 1 point. And you look back, and last time I checked, the points pay the same in December and January as they do in March. And so when the season comes down to it, and we look back and go, okay, where are they here? Well, this could be a moment that you could look back and give a lot of credit to Marich and to Avakian.
Well, and it seems like we talk about it every week with the scholarships, but we're changing kids' lives. I mean, there's I don't know what the record amount of scholarships given out in a year is, but certainly at the goaltending position, they're right there. So if we talk about sending these kids to the pros, and you mentioned Hofer already, and and Aiden Hill winning the Stanley Cup last year, but there's a lot more kids out of this league to turn into, plumbers and electricians and doctors and lawyers and scientists and what have you. And, that's kind of one of the fun things about this league, even, after the lights are out at the end of the night.
Yep. Exactly. And you got guys like Januzzi who got his first career, shutout in the pros in the ECHL, and then you got Gauthier who got a call up, I think, to the AHL, and he's been doing well in the ECHL as well in the Penguin system. So yeah, you've just got all different guys kind of doing different things. And last I knew, Cole Kaler was doing some pretty exciting things. I was asked to kind of not say too much with what was going on there with him, but just that he was being pretty successful in his next adventures. And so, even if the goalies don't go make pro or different things like that, like you said, they go on and do some pretty special things with their careers after they're done. And the WHL scholarship is definitely a big part of that.
Boy, and that's a goalie I hadn't thought about in some time, but similar to Avakian, that was basically out of a job and got a second chance here in Portland and really kind of made it into something. So it's kind of I mean, if I don't know about you or you the listener, but if I didn't have second chances, I would have been in deep shit.
Yep, you and me both, man.
Yeah,
you and me both. Yep.
All right. Well, I know you've got prior commitments. You got any closing thoughts as we put a bow on this in this episode?
Not really, other than just enjoy the season, right? Enjoy the process, enjoy the development. We talk about all the time it's a developmental league for everybody, including podcasters and bankers who pretend to be reporters in the evening and things like that. So enjoy the season, enjoy the ride. Remember the fact that these are 16 to 20-year-olds who are doing the very best that they can. Be nice on social media. People do see it. Parents see it. Kids see it. Friends see it. Cousins see it. So be respectful, but also in the process, enjoy it. Enjoy the fact that there's a great junior hockey team here in town, and get out and support them. And before you go, I think there's a special place where you can get some happy hour pricing, if I remember right.
Yeah, they continue to expand the facilities down at Cartside. There's room, come one, come all. I think we talk about it. Even if the Trailblazers are playing, it still works. So yeah, we got room for you. I don't know how Snowmageddon's going to affect that, but time will tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on again, Chad. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you around the rink.
All right, appreciate your time, Josh.
Thanks, Chad.